Hi, everybody. This is Chris.
This is Matt.
And this is your turn, Mark.
Oh, it's on. I'm on.
You're on. We're on.
Hello. I'll blame it on satellite land.
Blame it on satellite. There's a delay. There's a storm cloud
we're all
going
in
over.
Wisconsin, but it's still got to go up to the satellite.
Exactly.
Right? So, well, hello, everyone. I'm Mark Lemmert from 6502 Workshop.
Yep.
Welcome.
And for anybody who normally watches us, all 53 of you, which, by the way, we cracked 50, so I'm super thrilled about that. You might notice this looks different because it's different. We're talking with Mark today because Mark is running a Kickstarter, and that may seem contrary to our 20-year-old game rule, but you are writing it on an Apple II.
Yes. I know. I keep getting funny looks when I say that, and comments like, I haven't heard Apple II game and new in the same sentence in decades, and but I go for the shock value. It's so much more fun than being one of a million people writing a mobile game or something like that. So this has been a lot of fun. So Nox Archaist, many of you probably heard about it already and are tired of hearing we talk about it, but I'll just tell you a little bit about it for no other reason than I think I finally got my blurb really well down. I don't think I've really been doing the game justice in my ramblings before about, it's a tile RPG and sword and sorcery theme, modeled after the games of the 80s, developed on Apple II, playable PC. Everybody's heard that, but here's a really great description that we came up with recently that I think really captures the essence. So Nox Archaist is set in a sinister world ruled by sorcery and swords. And adventurers brave enough to explore Nox Archaist will encounter engaging NPCs and a vast storyline within a non-linear world. Hordes of vile enemies will block your path to fame and riches, so get ready. And gamers will also enjoy features like skill-driven character development and strategic turn-based combat scenarios, which integrate with the game's storyline and also push the boundaries of the Apple II platform.
Awesome.
Very good.
Awesome.
That's a hell of a blurb.
It's a hell of a
Thank
blurb.
And you're funding. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you go.
Oh, I was going to say, and you're funding on Kickstarter. How has that experience been?
Well, it's interesting. We're at 32% funding as of today, and about 3 weeks to go. And I think that it's fair to say that we're doing better than anybody else ever predicted that would happen for an Apple II game. I mean, that's the really cool thing. And as far as overall as Kickstarters go, it's possible we may pull this off. It's going to be a challenge. It's been a challenge. Will be a challenge, and we really the only way we can do it is with the support of the community to get behind this, which they have been. And I encourage everybody, please continue to spread the word and harass people if you need it. If you are an Apple II fan and you have not backed this, why? Even if you don't care about games, the point here is things like this don't happen very often. And right. The more support we get, the more likely it is that people are going to develop software on the Apple II, games in particular, but even software in general. And we're the bulldozer, and get behind the bulldozer here, and let's pave the way for a lot of new cool Apple II development in the future, and we can do that together.
Yep. I will say, because I know some people are concerned about this sort of thing, they want to know like where I'm coming from. I've backed the project. I mean, not huge, but I've backed the project. This is part of the reason we reached out to you is Matt and I want to do a sort of retrospective, something with more editing and something a little more polished about retro gaming today. And we picked 4 games we want to cover: Nox Archaist, Unknown Realms, Bard's Tale 4, and Shroud of the Avatar. And I will say, of the 4, I'm most excited about this game.
Definitely.
Well, thank you. And thank you very much for your support, Chris, on the Kickstarter. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. The other games feel like we're reinventing. We're sort of building it new as we think it would look. But with what you're doing, you're using the old parts. And I think that's incredible. I do want to ask you one more thing about the Kickstarter. Your total is around $40,000 is what you're shooting
Yes.
for. That's not enough to get somebody to quit their day job. Like, what is? I mean, why did you pick that number? What is that cover? What is that paying for? Because some people worry about that.
Sure. That's a great question, and this will probably be a good time for one of my usual disclaimers. I'm not a professional programmer. That's my hobby. I've been doing programming since I was a kid, starting on the Apple II, and had a career in IT for a while. But for the last 10 years, easily, my career is in finance and business management. I'm the chief financial officer of a software company in Chicago. That's in the world of cloud computing and cloud software applications. So in many ways, this is pretty close to home. And additionally, as far as it comes to running something like a Kickstarter, all I have to do is put my day hat on, and I'm managing a business. I'm doing financial projections, and
Right.
and that's something that would drive many programmers just absolutely up the wall. And so I feel really fortunate to be able to kind of combine those skill sets together here. And with respect to the $40,000, that's the product of a very detailed financial forecast that itemizes suppliers and what are we buying from who at what price, what's the minimum order, all of those parts and pieces that roll into, in addition to fixed costs like art, the artist, that's a one-time cost, boxes, you pay for that every time. I built a financial model in Excel that wraps all that together and just projects out, here's what the costs are going to be at a given number of backers distributed across the reward tiers based on some assumptions, and how many are US, how many are international, what's the shipping, all that gets rolled together. And it spits out, the answer at the end, and the answer was 42. 43 in this
somehow managed to be that.
It's one of the interesting coincidences here that we actually came that close to a number involving 42.
I think that's really impressive, because I watch a lot of campaigns, and like the two I'm thinking of off the top of my head are Shroud of the Avatar and Chris Roberts one, Star Citizen.
Mm-hmm.
And watching them spiral out of control money wise. So that's good to hear that you actually planned it out. I think it's going to be 50.
Novel thing. Yeah, this was not a dart throw. Projections are never perfect.
Right.
And but that's also a reality I'm quite familiar with in my day job. Mm-hmm. And basically, essentially, I plan to be wrong by a certain amount, and make sure so those aren't surprising events or other things that really tank indie game Kickstarters. Is when the creators get the tax bill, all that stuff is taxable, and when you spend the money versus when you collect it, all those issues. Well, I happen to be a CPA, so I've got that all under control, and that's all. I hope can give our backers confidence that this is going to enable us to focus on the game and get it done, because we're not going to be distracted by, those kinds of issues which can really mess up a lot of projects, as you mentioned. And back to your point about, 43 or round numbers, $40,000, not enough to get anybody to quit their day job. That's absolutely right. And I never, that's not my goal. It's never anything that I see happening. We're not expecting to make much, if any, money on this. We just, set the goal based on here's what we need to meet the minimum order requirements for the suppliers, pay the fixed costs like the artwork, and we're having professional custom artwork done. And it sounds like a big number. It is a big number. And, ultimately part of it is just because, we're trying to produce this thing at a fairly low volume versus the games of the 80s. They were selling, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of copies. Ultima 4 sold 1 million. We're trying to do this on a few hundred.
Right.
That's that's where the money's going to your previous question. Fundamentally, it's going to pay for the material, the physical stuff that people are getting, the box, the art on it, and the quality paper for the manual, the and my personal favorite, the
cloth map.
That's beautiful.
Gotta have a cloth map.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or yours is on. Yours isn't cloth. You did something different with yours, didn't you?
Yeah, it's actually it's canvas.
Nice.
That's the material that it's on, and it's very flexible, just like cloth would be. But also imagine if you wanted to put it up on your wall, which I always like to do.
Yep.
Taking this and putting it up on the wall is going to be it's going to look good.
Right.
Just basically tacked to the wall. I mean, if you want to frame it, go ahead. It's just a lot easier for that kind of a situation, and still has that flexibility. You can fold it up. Basically just
and stick it away.
Fit right in the game box like that.
Very nice.
You have a couple other physical objects that you're including with the game for different Kickstarter levels, and there's some coins that are made in Wisconsin.
Yes.
Chris and I are also both from Wisconsin, so who's making those for you?
Yeah, these are the coins, and they don't have the ones I have right here today. Don't have the laser engraved design on it. I managed to leave those over at Mike Reimer's house, my project co-founder, and but that's actually because to answer your question, he makes the coins. He's got a workshop in his garage like you wouldn't believe, and has the equipment to cut out these wood shapes. And he has a friend with a laser engraver and a wife who does artistic stuff who came up with the design, and boom, boom, boom. Nice. They put those together and are really excited about doing those pieces for the game.
Yeah, that's awesome. Everything looks great.
Yeah, no, you have a lot of feelies too. Like you've got chainmail, you've got the box already going.
Oh, the box is wonderful.
Like normally people are like, let's throw a map at them and
one
little
sneaking
doodad.
These in and out of the camera view to
distract. We'll just wave through the hour.
Yeah, and we wanted to load up the box with feelies and give people the opportunity to have some choice in it. The core box. That's going to get you your box, of course, the map, the printed manual, and an in-game artifact. And then, as you mentioned, there's higher level reward tiers where you can get things like a hand wax sealed envelope containing a writ from the king.
I love that.
Just to clear something up, one of the videos on the Kickstarter mentions that we put the manual in the envelope, and we did say that at one time, but that plan actually changed. We realized, well, some people are going to want to keep the wax sealed envelope sealed, and they won't have to open it to take the manual out. So the manual will not be in the wax sealed envelope. It will be a writ from the king, which is not required for gameplay. So read it if you want, open it and read it if you want. If you'd rather keep it sealed, I'm sure somebody will slap it up on the internet, and you can see what it actually does.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump because you mentioned that someone will slap it up on the internet. It's got me thinking of something way over to the side, so welcome to Going Off the Rails. You have someone doing copy protection for the game.
Welcome to the Going Off the Rails segment.
You have someone doing copy protection for the game, but the way you made it sound was like you're actually going to encourage people to try and break the copy protection.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Which makes no sense in the context of the 1980s, but makes a lot of sense in the context of Kansas Fest, because at this point, copy protection is kind of a tradition, and it's fun, and basically you announce you're doing a game at Kansas Fest, and you say it's going to be the floppy version to be copy protected, and everybody cheers. They're like, oh, yeah. and then like I had the privilege of announcing that it's going to be written by none other than the legendary Grand Master copy protection cracker Cucumba. Then you get a standing ovation.
Nice.
Awesome.
So, and that's exactly the case. He will be doing that for us, switching sides temporarily from his work in digital preservation and cracking software. He's going to turn his skills to the dark side and write the copy protection for Nox Archaist. And he and I have been collaborating on it in ways to integrate the copy protection with the game engine, which wasn't always the case, often wasn't the case in the 80s. Sometimes it was. Rowan Gustafson would write some custom, thing, and, it would stump people for a long time. But a lot of times the copy protection, as some people may well know, was actually added by the distribution house that was duplicating the discs. And it was like copy protection as a service.
Right.
Slap it on there. And so the same algorithms got used over and over and over. And this is something Mark Pilgrim has done a tremendous amount of research. That's where I actually learned it from. And with his passport application that can remove the copy protection from discs. And he's found these patterns in thousands of titles and et cetera. And in any event, with Nox Archaist, this is going to be more of the Roland Gustafson style custom job, where it's thought through as far as how to integrate the copy protection with the game engine so that it can tell when it's being tampered with but not successfully cracked, and things like that. So it should be a very engaging cracking experience for anybody who wants to try their hand on that. And since it is just for fun, it's not in any way intended as being something to like prevent people from playing the game. The digital copy of the game available for digital download will not be copy protected.
Nice.
So, that's obviously going to be able to be moved around freely, and is including transfer to floppy disk using ADTP. All the I said everybody knows the acronym, but I'll say it a little short. Using ADT Pro, transferring it to floppy disk, the usual method will work just fine there. And of course, we're encouraging everybody, hey, please, back us on the Kickstarter, or later on down the road, make a donation, support the project. But ultimately, we want everybody to be able to play the game who wants to, and if they just can't afford to, chip something in, that's totally understandable.
Yeah. On the coding, so you've got someone doing your copy protection, and I believe the file IO for you as well.
Yep, that's Cucumba as well on the file IO.
Cucumba, that's awesome. And you're coding like the bulk of it, I understand, or am I wrong?
Yes,
on that? You are. Are you doing
everything
it with anyone else?
That's not file IO or copy protection, I'm doing, such as the game engine. That's obviously the huge portion of it, and yeah, from the ground up, I have a picture somewhere of when I drew the first tile on the screen. It was like a tree in the upper left-hand corner, and I send this text message to Mike Reimer. I'm like, look, I drew a tree. And I drew trees before, and I made tile engines before. This was the first time in 6502 assembly language that I drew a tree, so it was pretty exciting to me. And then the next thing came is, look, I drew a row of trees in a column. Next thing we know, we had a whole screen, and away we go. So
yeah, anybody who codes feels you right now. like I get
What's
it.
That?
Anybody who can code feels you right now. They're like, I got this one thing done. And everyone's like, it's a tree. You're like, no, there's a ton of work.
That was nothing compared to my excitement when I got the Apple II to print the letter M in a particular context. I mean, obviously, you can get the print M, but I had to figure out from scratch how to write a bare metal bootloader to launch Nox Archaist, because there was no way, I just could tell that there's no way that I'm going to be able to do a tile engine on the Apple II with DOS in memory, that big fat pig that occupies everything from 9600 on up in memory. And so kick DOS out of memory, well, that's the way it was done, right? These, bare metal bootloaders. And there's no book on how to do that. I was spelunking around in old news groups and things, some of them conveniently, which are archived. I'm seeing these messages from 1980, whatever, people talking about this and that. And, I'm patching together the information, read through beneath DOS, which had a lot of great clues. And pretty much, came to the point where it's like, okay, I know that the ROM of the Apple, which has boot 0 in it to bring the system up to a certain point. At some point, it's going to try to read something from the floppy disk to kind of get to that next stage of the boot process. And that's where the bare metal, customized bootloader has to take over. But it's like, okay, well, but where on the floppy disk? I couldn't find anywhere that said. And I finally thought, well, it can't be this simple. I'm just going to try track 0, sector 0 and see what happens. And I tried it. And it was like, sure enough, that was it. And then I get this M on the screen, which was like my control test character to print. It's like if everything worked, then it would print M. And so when I saw that,
Awesome.
I was like, wow, it was that simple. It couldn't have been funnier if the answer was 42.
Right.
Who would have guessed?
Got it.
So,
it seems like you're doing a lot to preserve and propagate what you're learning from this project. Why do you think that's important? With like Unity and Unreal, and there's all kinds of engines. Why is it important for people to know assembly today?
Well, I guess there's probably a lot of reasons, and ones that immediately come to mind is it's where it all began. There's no way to truly take the magic out of computing and really understand what's going on at like a physics level without going through the gateway of assembly language. You can learn a little bit about the hardware and electromagnetism and some things like that, and it kind of makes sense. But how to take that and then bridge it to all the stuff that you're seeing on the screen, even in modern computers.
Yeah.
At some point, it has to go from being binary opcodes that the processor understands into layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of programming construct that leads to here's what's on your screen. And that was true on the Apple II. It's true with modern computers today. It's really, I think, a lot more approachable to learn assembly language on the Apple II than on modern computers, because on modern computers, assembly language on modern computers really isn't intended to be used by humans anymore, because the artificial intelligence in the computers can write better assembly code from a compiled high-level language than a human can. Mm-hmm. And so Mark Pilgrim put this perfectly on a tweet. He said, so that pretty much limits the universe of people that can really gain anything by hand optimizing assembly code on modern computers. It limits that universe of people down to basically Becky Berger.
Yep. And Carmack. Yeah, like
yeah, exactly. A few notable others. And so therefore, in terms of like this historical understanding where it all began in a way that's still relevant today, as far as like what's really going on behind the scenes, it's really, I think, a lot more approachable on an Apple II. Because as we know, I mean, people really did, write an assembly. You had to. That was
right.
The only way to really get anything of consequence done. So I think it's important for that reason, as well as probably many others, including, I don't know, I don't want to see the art of writing 8-bit tile RPGs get lost to history. And right now is not that far off from that, because there was never a book written on how to write an 8-bit tile RPG on the Apple II. Maybe on some other platforms, but not on the Apple II. The closest were some books about writing arcade games.
Yeah,
and that gets you a good handle on graphics, basically. But in RPGs, there's so many other things going on with data structures and the whole concept of a tile map moving around the center of the player. And I guess I feel like it's important to preserve that knowledge of how that was done. That's definitely part of what we're setting out to do with our site at www.6502workshop.com. It certainly is featuring Nox Archaist as being our current project, but it's also intended to be kind of a knowledge repository of how to make tile games. And it's certainly a long ways away from where I'd like it to be with kind of a, being a library of here's the core concepts, but it's a start. And we've put out a variety of blog posts that talk tech and, kind of dive into some of the algorithms that do things like move NPCs around or handle line of sight. And so we're making progress on that, on the documentation side.
Have you considered, because Matt and I were talking about before you came on, we were talking about the limitations of programming books, that invariably someone will be like, do A, do B, now that you're at F, like, wait, time out. You skipped a whole bunch of steps in there. Have you considered doing something like YouTube tutorials or something like that to kind of show people? Maybe start that for a channel?
Well, that's a good question. had not thought of it in the context of programming. I had thought of it fairly recently in the context of gameplay with Nox Archaist, that I could do some YouTube videos there to show how straightforward certain things are, but may not necessarily be intuitive in a way that it was just never an option in the 1980s. The manuals could only go so far, and then there was a lot of word by mouth of like, well, you can do this and this. So I thought about it in that context, and likely we'll do that. As far as a tutorial for programming, I had not, but I should, because obviously we've got that as a modern medium now, and that might be a way to convey some of the more complicated, abstract aspects of it that don't really lend itself well to, like you said, just kind of do A, do B, do C. Some of the art, maybe, and including. One thing that just stands out to me in the early and mid design stage of the game engine was just how, I knew that memory was limited, very, very, very limited. And I knew there was all this stuff I had to get done. And so when I would approach major chunks of the game, whether that was the line of sight algorithm or the algorithm for launching projectiles, it was kind of like, here's what I want to do. Here's what I'm pretty sure is possible to do strictly from, I can write the code to produce this effect on the screen, but how does that relate to the memory available and what's going to be needed? And if I do this, do I back myself into a corner later that I can't get out of? And sometimes it's not even like, how much of the 128K do I need and what's available? It's more like, all right, so this particular algorithm is going to reside in a module loaded from disk from 9600 to FFFFF. And, that's a slice of the memory that's available in the computer, but that's all the memory that's available for, say, the combat module. And then somehow within that, it's got to do 5 different things, and this one thing I'm working on is, well, just one of them. So it creates a lot of sort of 3-dimensional chess going on in one's head, and a lot of points where, as a developer, you just have to kind of go with the best, weigh it all out, and you kind of reach a gut feeling point where it's like, yeah, I think that this is a pretty good bet, or this, that's just a bit too risky. I'm not going to go there. And that's something that's really hard to teach, really hard to explain. And there I just tried in 45 seconds to explain it. But in some YouTube videos, I might be able to peel really back the lid on that a little bit more effectively than in the written form.
Yeah, no.
So thanks for that suggestion.
Yeah, I was thinking about, like, as you were talking about that, I'm thinking about 2 of the people who work for me, and they're young enough that they have never worked on a Commodore. They've never worked on an Apple II. They've never dealt with actual hardware limitations. The hardware is so good, they will never code enough to do it. And just trying to explain to them, like, try to keep this concise. One of them handed me a script that was over 100,000 lines that I rewrote in under 1,000 lines. And I'm like, you can shrink this. Like, think. And I just feel like the next generation doesn't have that sense of conservation of code.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that reminds me, to your previous question about why is this important? That's one of the reasons, because, as to your point, the modern programmers, don't write like we did, on the Apple. Memory is it's a commodity resource, and it's not their fault. They're not taught in school, to write in a minimalist sort of a way. And the end result is, there's a lot of fat software out there, and in some cases, well, what does it matter? The machine's fast enough and all that. But I have to wonder, as I sit there and wait for, booting up my Windows 7 machine, and it takes, I don't know how many minutes for it to do all its stuff in the background where I hear the hard drives going and this and that. And maybe, I get a cup of coffee and come back in 10 minutes, things will actually be at a state where they're responsive, and I can, it's like, if from the beginning, at the bottom of the stack up, minimalist coding were applied, how much faster would this be in the end? And instead, it's like everybody's just doing a piece of it. And well, within the context of my piece of it, well, this doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And maybe it doesn't within that piece, but everything adds up.
It sure does.
Yeah.
What tools are you using in your development process? Do you use anything modern? Like, is your code on a GitHub repository, or what do you edit in?
Good question. I'm using a cross assembler, as you probably guess. I learned 6502 using Liza, or is it Lisa? It's spelled one way, it's pronounced the other, and I always get flame mail every time I get this.
Well, here comes some more.
So you can't say I got it wrong. It's one or the other.
One or the other.
And that was sitting down at my physical Apple IIe, banging it out. Largely because the book that I chose to learn it from had examples in Liza, and I found the best way to learn a programming language is type in the examples. So, and there was fun nostalgic experience there for a while. But then I got a cross assembler set up. I'm using SBASM for the cross assembler. It's not one of the. There's definitely ones more popular than that, like CC65 and Merlin 32. I chose SBASM or Spasm because all it does is 6502. It's very straightforward to set up if that's what you're trying to do, and I just found that to be much easier than wading through a whole bunch of libraries and things that I have to tell the cross assembler to ignore that I'm not going to use to get to the point where I can do some kind of a hello world equivalent in assembly language, which of course isn't really hello world because that's not a simple program. It's
right.
more like load AA into the accumulator and break to the monitor and see if it happens.
Right.
That's my hello world on the
Right.
6502. But so that's the cross assembler. I'm using Apple Commander to write the binaries to disk images after the Spasm assembles them. I'm using, what else am I using? CiderPress. I use that on the side to kind of peek at disk images, and if I need to see, all right, what's actually in this binary file, so I can compare that to something I'm looking at in the monitor, in the game. That's how I kind of do those kind of comparisons there. I've got some Windows batch files that ties it all together, so I can go. Basically, I type Go1 HD at my Windows command prompt, and that triggers a batch file that builds the entire game onto a hard drive in AppleWin, copies everything over to AppleWin, launches AppleWin, and so after Go1 HD, after about a minute, the next thing I do is I click the AppleWin boot button, and I'm seeing the results on screen. So I found that to be really wonderfully efficient, which would just not have been possible on the original machine. Beyond just the build, the seamless kind of click button build process, just the concept of being able to take the entire game and build it in one shot. Right. With back then, as I never did it in the 80s, but from what I understand, it was like you had to break the game into these small little chunks and load them in to memory one at a time, because you just couldn't fit the assembler in memory and all of these assembly source code for the game in memory at the same time. And I mean, that is a level of tediousness that I just can't even comprehend. And
yeah.
Well, speaking of that tedious,
so my hat's off to those of you that did it.
Right.
For real.
How much time a week are you spending making this game? I mean, you got a day job, so.
Sure. Well, basically, this is my, I guess I put it, my full-time hobby. Any minute of the day that I'm not spending on my day job or just sort of the basic necessities of life, like food and occasionally cleaning my house. I'm working on this game, so evenings, weekends, I'm hammering away at it. I've put all other hobbies on hold, and that's been hard because I like to play games. I like to watch TV as much as anybody does, and especially movies like Lord of the Rings. I'd love to sit down and just watch Lord of the Rings, all movies, binge watch them again.
Right.
But I put all that on hold because that's just the only way to muster the time to be able to tackle a project like this. And I don't have any regrets. I mean, I've been in this mode for like 2 years of this is all I do. This is all I do. This is all I do. But I'm wired to do it because I guess I learned how to do it when I went back to school. I originally dropped out of college to start an internet service provider in the mid 90s.
Okay.
And that's kind of how my career got going, and eventually sold, that business, and, then thought, well, I better go back to school and get all the qualifications that people benefit from when, working for other people.
Right.
and had to go through working full time and going to school
that's hard.
Is at the same time, and I wanted to get it done as quickly as possible, which still meant years, but it was a pretty heavy course load I was taking on top of working full time. So I went through that phase of life where I shut everything down. I had, except for my day job, I shut everything else down in my life as far as hobbies and just the occasional, get-togethers with family, very maybe rare get-together with, a friend here and there, but everything else going on shutdown so I could focus on a particular goal. And I did it. I finished my bachelor's degree, got an MBA, became a CPA, did all of that in this mode of I'm focused on these specific goals while working full time. And that whole process was, 5 years long. And so when coming back at this to write this game, I thought, okay, well, I did that before. I can choose to do it again, and with this project I think it's going to be a lot more fun. So
yeah, I'm betting a little bit.
just a little bit. Occasionally, I kind of have this feeling of like, I stumble across, that looks like a really cool game. But it's like, nope. I know what happens. As a kid in the 80s when I was trying to write my own games, inevitably the death of them was
some new game.
I would, a new Ultima would come out and I'd start playing that. And by the time I got done, it was like, oh yeah, what was that game I was writing? And, then I would have forgotten, enough about it. And I'm like, I'll just start over and write a better one,
Yeah.
So my hard drive is littered with half-finished games.
Oh yeah, exactly. I don't have any of my stuff from back then, or mine would be as well. But
what games, like you talked about playing a bunch of old games back then, what games do you think had the biggest influence on this? Obviously Ultima, Bard's Tale, probably Might and Magic, but like what are some obscure games you think people would probably have missed?
Well, I've taken a look, of course, at a number of Apple II RPGs. Just as like I feel like I kind of need to study the genre, what we're doing here. I think some of the ones that were not certainly unknowns, but not the big name. I mean, it was Ultima, Wizardry, Bard's Tale. That was like the big trio.
Yeah.
So other ones that I thought were pretty interesting were Wrath of Deathanor, Deathlord, and actually Mobius, which is really kind of an odd game. It's not really fitting into the tile genre in the way that the others were.
No.
Yet it kind of is. I can kind of see the tile concept going on there, and I really want to go back and play that because I always remember as a kid really having a hard time figuring out what the heck was going on. and I want to go back and see if I have the same experience, or if now being a more experienced game player, I can actually, figure out what the point was of all of it.
I remember when I played Mobius, I got it. I turned it on. I played it for like a week. And I'm like, I don't get this. And then I came back like 6 months later and went, okay, I'm going to figure this out. And it's a really good game. It's really interesting, but you have to give it the time.
Yeah.
Did you get to play Deathlord?
A little bit.
Okay.
I have not played it start to finish.
Well, good luck with that. That's a hard game.
I kind of had that feeling, and Wrath of Deathanor was too. That was one I played it in the 80s, and I gave it the same kind of effort that I gave to Mobius, but still found that I just really couldn't quite figure out what was going on. Now, in all honesty, part of the problem with Wrath of Death and Or and Mobius may be that I was playing from a distributed offsite backup, and did not have a manual available that might have had some clues as to what was going on. But
no, that's usually our first thing when we do our our videos each month. It's like, did you read the manual? You needed to read the manual.
Yeah. And I was always one. I loved reading the manual.
Yeah.
And with a couple of games that my parents allowed me to buy, which was a thing in my family.
Yeah.
Just not wanting, don't want kids playing too many games and getting hooked on it, and that's gone out the window, I think, in the modern day for many parents. But it was a tightly controlled thing in my family. But the couple of games that I did, get permission to purchase, I loved the manuals. I read them cover to cover. And so in the cases where I didn't read the manual, it's because I simply just didn't have it.
Right.
But I actually understand that that's a pretty obscure thing these days. I read an interesting article from like a computer science professor that, talked about, kind of games in the modern day and the modern day student, and starting with, he titles his classes as always something to do with game development, because that's the only way to get anybody to sign up for computer science these days, first of all. And then in the courses where they actually, really do take a deep dive into games, he kind of has them tour some of the old games, and as an assignment, tells them go play Ultima 4 and study why this was such a groundbreaking moment in the evolution of games, which is important to understand for anybody who wants to program games today. And he described how, so the kids would kind of go off and play the game and come back and be confused, having no idea what to do, in most cases. And, it invariably ends up into a discussion of like, okay, well, did you read the manual? Well, what manual? Well, that thing, that I gave you. And they're like, oh, I just thought that was the stuff they put in the box. He's like, well, no, you got to read that to understand how to play the game. And they're like, really?
It's part of it.
Are you including a lot of lore in the manual with your game?
Well, that's the plan. The manual is largely not been written yet. We've got, we have a proof of concept here, basically, to demonstrate that, we have everything coordinated with the logistics to be able to do artwork, print artwork, put it into, a booklet form, and etc. The content in the manual needs to be written, and that's what the Kickstarter is about. If the Kickstarter funds, then we will have the resources to be able to pay an artist to be able to write all the different pages of the manual, and I'll write most of the content myself, but also pay somebody to do the layout of that content with the art, because I don't have those skills myself.
Right.
And so that's one of the reasons we haven't approached that yet. Is a lot of it just depends on if we fund the Kickstarter, which is certainly looks possible if we can get everybody in the community behind this, or a good chunk of people behind it. Then the plan will lock in of how we're going to do the manual. And I'm sorry, I'm wandering off the point. As far as the lore goes,
welcome to our show.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I'm fitting right in, right? I hope so. Yeah. When the writing of the content, it's not going to be dry and boring, manual. Like this is going to be, like folks remember from Ultima Bard's Tale, where the manual is telling you a story, about the game, talking about the spells in a very colorful, sort of a way, and talking about the world in a very, colorful sort of a way, and the lore, the lore behind it. And Nox Archaist is going to be a very, dark game. I described it as a sinister world, and some of the backstory of this world, that is why it has this dark and sinister overtone, will be, revealed in the manual, and of course some of it revealed in game, for example.
Awesome.
I'm just going through my notes here real quick, because there's a couple things I want to talk about. But one of the big things
Oh, good. I burned my notes accidentally. So
happens.
I'm making this up as I go.
No, because there are like 5 things in there I wanted to talk about, but I'm going to go off the track myself because one of the things that got me immediately excited about this is your lightning bolt video.
Oh, sure. Yes.
From someone who programs and watching the lightning bolt go across the screen and remembering what Apple II games were capable of doing at the time. How did you do that? I mean,
Well,
most people who like aren't from then are probably like, yeah, he threw some sprites on the screen. What's your problem? Like, but from us who know, how did you do that?
Well, I really appreciate the question because it's one of my favorite parts in the game. It was like literally one of my early goals, like in the project of like, I want to do this particular thing. If I can achieve this particular thing, almost nothing else matters, you know. I guess because lightning bolts are my favorite spell anywhere in any game, as well as exactly the reason that you mentioned. It was always denied to us in Apple II RPGs. So I was just laser focused on a quest to make that happen. And there were a few more things I was going to say, but let's just skip it. Let's get into the how. So basically, what we have here is a merger between the. Oh, hey, a quick question.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the box in the lower right-hand corner. Are you going to add the gameplay video in?
The gameplay, actually, what was funny is I was like, oh, I wish I could have the lightning bolt thing, and then just as soon as I said that, it lightning bolted. So you can't see it, but it is there. Yeah. Right now I'm watching the one. What one is this? This is Dungeons of Drathnor, S1E3. I just watched him like summon a bunch of zombies, and then there were lightning bolts shot. Now he's walking around the chest room.
Oh, there is lightning bolt. Was it orange or blue?
I think orange. Let me just.
Okay.
The
orange one, it's the lightning bolt pattern, but we're calling that like Infernal Blast or something, like it's a big stream of fire. If you want the blue lightning bolt, you'll find that in Catapult Part 2.
Okay. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go boop. Going to turn off that for a second. Oh. Exit full screen. We'll go find this because we can get that going here and have people watch that while we talk about Catapult 1. And I'll bet that'll have Catapult 2. Where'd you go? I can find this. I know how to work YouTube.
I'm looking here as well to find the exact spot in the video. Whichever one of us finds it first will be the winner.
Right. Oh, that just says Apple II. Catapult Part 2. All right. I'll kick this out to full screen. Turn back on in here again, and off it's going.
Is it helpful if I tell you the exact
yeah, if you know the timestamp, we can jump to that.
Bolt is? Okay. I don't have it yet, but I will very quickly here. I'm in the battle scene, so it's only a minute. There it is. Go to like 1 minute and 30 seconds. That's like right before it. If you want some lead up.
There we go. Okay, I paused on that too. So we got that on the screen. We can kind of just look at it for a second and enjoy it. Matt, you'll have to catch it later.
All right. Then just let me know when you're ready. I can jump back into.
I'm ready. Because I got it in. Because the thing that like I'm used to these old tile games, everything is tile. Like if it doesn't fit specifically within the binds of a tile, it's not going to happen. And this you've definitely got it sort of sliding at an angle, and that's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's get into the how. So basically, what this is it's a fundamental merger between the principles of tile graphics and the principles of arcade animation graphics. In arcade games, it was a common thing that you would have basically animated shapes and projectiles kind of going wherever they wanted to go. There weren't really any, rules as far as a grid to speak of in arcade games. And so that was, really the way I approached it. First off, I thought, okay, well, underneath the hood, the concept of a tile grid is an illusion that is deliberately created in assembly language as a way of drawing shapes, the same shapes over and over in an organized pattern, and correlating them to hexadecimal tile ID numbers that are stored somewhere as your map data. And that's all an artificial construct. And so very early on, I was optimistic that there was a way to make this happen, because I thought, well, I can just, when I want to shoot a lightning bolt, not use the routines I wrote for drawing tiles, and instead just write a special graphics routine that, plugs values directly into video memory, just like the tile routines do, but instead just, ignore the tile boundaries or simply not create them and have it do what I wanted it to do. And that was the basic premise that I operated from. And the nagging question in the back of my head the whole time was, okay, but why didn't anybody do that? There's got to be a reason, and that was a common situation. Anytime with any feature where I was trying to push the frontier, I would always kind of go through that exercise in my head of asking myself that why question. And there were some things I came up with a good answer and decided, nope, not going to do that, because I think I see why, and that would just be a dead end. But with the lightning bolts and the sort of arcade style projectiles in general that have been shown in combat, I just couldn't come up with a good reason why not. So I dove in. Yeah. And what kind of unfolded from there was the lightning bolt is, of course, it has a shape table for it. In fact, it has 16 shape tables to handle the different angles that the lightning bolt can be at. And that was necessary because it's not just like a simple line. So it's not really practical to mathematically calculate the slope of the line to the target, and then, basically through an algorithm kind of, build the bit pattern of the shape. That would just take so much memory and CPU. It's just, that's a dead end as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So the only way I saw was, okay, we're going to have to solve this with memory and just store 16 different shape tables to approximate fairly, reasonably well, the actual slope of the line that is between the target and the firing position. So that was kind of one thing that happened. So then it's like, okay, well, how do we move this shape? Well, this comes down to arcade animation principles of moving shapes, and to move the shape horizontally, I do bit shifting. And actually, for that matter, this really is not common in arcade graphics. This was now, as I'm thinking about it, this was one of the tricky parts, because in arcade graphics, at least the way it's taught in the arcade books that are out there, they teach you to basically move shapes horizontally by storing 7 different copies of the shape table to reflect the different bit values that exist within the same screen byte or pair of screen bytes on the screen as you move the shape. Because unless you're moving a full screen byte left or right, the binary values to represent that shape are going to be different than they were before you moved it. So the shape table has to change. So either you manipulate the shape table, or you just store 7 different copies of it in memory to reflect a 1 pixel move left or right. And in the arcade, books, they always said, you do it using these 7 different shape tables. And even I was talking to John Brooks at Kansas Fest, excuse me, and he was surprised at the way we ended up doing this, because just from what I could glean from his perspective is, the way you usually do that is you have 7 different shape tables. And John Brooks, of course, wrote Rastan on the 2GS and many other, games. And so what really it came down to was that was not practical from a memory point of view to do within the construct of a tile engine. In arcade games, yeah, they do that all the time.
Right.
But there are the memory requirements for all the other stuff that's going on in the tile game. So basically, ruling out the option of storing 7 different shape tables, which incidentally would be 7 different shape tables times 16
Right.
for the lightning bolt. Ruling that out from a memory point of view.
Oh, why?
Yeah. Not going to happen. That left one option that I could find, and it's possible that some arcade games were doing this, and I'm just not aware of it.
Right.
But what it came down to was doing bit shifting, using the and aura, and LSR and ASL opcodes, and a few ROLs and RORs thrown in there between all your basket of opcodes that involves taking a byte and shifting the ones and the zeros in the byte, either to the left or to the right. And then if you've got a 1 or a 0 at the end of the byte and you shift it, and one byte always sort of drops off the end and it goes into the carry flag. If you're trying to shift bits between 2 different screen bytes, you've got to watch the bit that sort of gets pushed off the back of the byte, drops into the carry flag. Well, that's going to be your next bit that you're actually trying to move into the first bit position on the second screen byte. And so I wrote a complicated algorithm to do that, and to move those individual bits around within a screen byte and then between screen bytes, because the lightning bolt is 2 screen bytes wide.
Yeah.
And so I built that bridge in between them to affect the movement of allow a single shape table to just be altered in memory to transit between screen bytes, and then once it moves 2 pixels at a time, actually, in this case, and when it actually gets to the point where it has moved an entire screen byte or pair of screen bytes, it's kind of like reset to where the shape table would have been originally. Then the algorithm refreshes the shape table from a master and starts over again. That's
cool. That's really cool. Because once I saw that, then I started looking at all your other projectiles and just like, you were right in terms of you're like taking it. What's the next step? Everybody stopped at 88, 89 and just moved on to the next sort of thing. And you're like answering that question of what if we just kept going? What if we?
Yeah, that was absolutely the idea. And the there were a couple of things that arose as far as like, okay, back to, well, why wasn't this done?
Mm-hmm.
And part of it may have just been the construct that I described there was just not within the practical time budget of the RPGs, and they were pushing the frontier in other ways from the last iterations. So It wasn't kind of necessary, but this wasn't obviously an easy thing. The low-hanging fruit is gone.
Right.
But in the 80s, they were, understandably from a commercial point of view, looking at like, okay, well, how can we make a substantial improvement from the last version, and striking some balance between, what's easy and what's cool. And I can see why this one would not have made the cut. I didn't have to worry about a production release schedule, having done this before the Kickstarter, when there was any target date at all. This was just like, I had the luxury of just like, I'm going to go down this rabbit hole and just see where it goes.
Yeah, you don't have a publisher over your head going, tick, tick.
Right. Exactly. And so interestingly though, getting towards the end of it, there was a moment where I was like, oh, maybe this was why. Yeah. Because the thing is, and this was actually something Quinn Dunkey talked about at her session at Kansas Fest this year about high-res animation, which of course I hadn't seen yet, and I didn't know her at the time when I was doing this either. So the few people that have this information in their brain, Quinn being one of them, were not available to me at the time. But there's a thing when it comes to doing high-res animation where you don't want to have color animation on a color background. It's just really bad.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what we did. And the problem is, it's literally a binary problem.
Right.
Because as those of us that have done graphics programming on the Apple II know, there's a color bit on each byte, and that controls the color of what you're going to get. And it's different in odd and even columns and things like that. But that color bit is a factor as well. And the color bit can either be on or it's off. Those are your choices.
Right.
And when you're moving an animated shape on a background, you have to blend that shape into the background.
Right.
And that's where some of the and aura masks come in to take the lightning bolt, and you basically grab the bit pattern of the background, rip it out of video memory, put it in a buffer, and then grab the shape table for the lightning bolt or whatever the shape is, and then take the bit pattern of the shape table and use an aura mask, apply it to your buffered copy of the background, and it just sort of sneaks the ones and zeros for the lightning bolt into the spot that it needs to be within the bit pattern of the background without destroying the background.
Right.
And with a proper sort of black space around your shape so that you don't have color artifacting problems. Because 2 pixels next to each other form white, and you might not want white there.
Right.
And that's the basic principle. And then while as complicated as that is, it works great right up until the point that you have to think about, well, okay, but what if the color bit was off in the background bytes that you're ripping out of video memory, and the color bit is on for the bytes in the shape table of the shape, and that is right. I'm like, oh yeah. Can either be on, it can be off. It is literally a binary problem. And I am not aware of a solution to that exists, and I'd be highly doubtful that there is one at a programmatic level. Right. Fortunately, we found one at an artistic level.
Okay.
Before I scrapped the plan, I went crawling on my knees to the graphic artists on the team, saying, guys, we have this problem here. That cool thing we were going to do. Is there any way that you can draw the art in such a way for the animated shapes that this color artifacting that's going to happen sort of looks like it was intentional and it's not
brilliant.
Because I'm not an artist. And they're like, well, yeah, let's give this a try. And so they take a crack at it, and the next thing you know, well, we have things like the lightning bolt that you see where that color artifacting is going on, but doesn't really jump out, and especially when we're using it for spells, because if the colors get distorted a little bit, and it's always just in the periphery
right.
Of the shape, it's very easy to interpret it as part of the magical flourish that's going on,
yes.
Which is very appropriate because it's a spell. So I feel like we just lucked out on that. I saw the whole thing falling apart as it was done. This is right at the end. And there it was. And the other factor in play here that may be why it wasn't done in the 80s has to do with the fact that it takes a lot of memory just to simply write the projectile routine and the code for the spell. The lightning bolt spell itself is more than just the graphic. It has to, calculate, okay, well, this is a single target spell, so we got to acquire the target, and then we got to hit the target, and we got to apply spell damage, and there's stuff going on there that is unique to the lightning bolt spell. There's stuff there that's common to all single target spells, but only occur in spells. And the spells in Nox Archaist are fundamentally a lot more robust than what was seen in the 80s RPGs, including, there's a fireball where it's not just a tile shaped, ball of fire that hits a single target. Yeah. It's a tile shaped ball of fire that hits the target and then explodes. There's an algorithm that kicks in that calculates that pattern what targets are in it. All that is in a custom routine for the spell. And so where this ultimately ends up is a situation where there's just no way I could find to fit in memory that sort of custom set of subroutines for these complicated spells without loading them from disk.
Okay.
And that is actually what's happening when you cast a spell in Nox Archaist, is it loads from a spell file a block of code for that specific spell from disk into a buffer, executes it in the buffer, and then returns back to the main combat engine. And that could have been done back in the 80s, certainly, but it would have been slow.
I was gonna say, are you seeing some lag from that with the disk I/O time, or is it pretty quick because it's a short bit of code?
Well,
shortish.
Here's the thing: it definitely takes more time to cast a spell in Nox Archaist running on floppy than it did in Ultima, but it's not that bad. It's within acceptable margins.
Okay.
And the reason isn't because the spell code is small. The reason actually has to do with Pro RWTS that our team member, the legendary Cucumba, wrote.
Right.
And it speeds up disk I/O
nice
many times over the original RWTS that developers would have been using back in the 80s, and additionally has features like I can actually request I want 5 AF bytes of memory read from this particular file and get it, rather than to get that I've got to load 5 sectors and peel it out and all of that, because he's baked that all into Pro RWTS to have that ability to do what he calls an arbitrary file offset read, where you're just what you want is what you get. And certainly it's doing some buffering in the background,
right.
Is ultimately it's dealing with blocks. It's designed to read a Protoss ordered disk image, even though the Protoss operating system is not in memory, wouldn't have room for it. But
right.
Pro RWTS is just a file system driver, and that's what gives us the I/O speed advantage to be able to do something like reading spells from disk.
That's cool.
And that was something that it was a risk in the whole process as well, because I knew Pro RWTS was faster. I doubt I would have tried it if we didn't have Pro RWTS, but still, it was one of those where, boy, I don't know.
A lot of work to make that happen.
We're going to have to find out.
Yep.
Yeah. You mentioned a few things in there that you came across them and you were like, why did no one do this? And one of the things I'm most excited about is the user interface. Like, I'm looking forward to a user interface that's not terrible in an old school role-playing game where you have to type like the hex code of the spell you want to cast. Did you use a lot of modern kind of UI elements when you designed the UI?
Yeah, there was definitely some modern influence there, and the basic concept is we went full screen with the map display, almost full screen, short of there's a 2 tile width space on the right hand side of the screen that we reserve for like the time of day and how much gold you have, but otherwise it's full screen. And by nature of that, it's eliminating the text window that RPGs would have had set up, like in the 1/3 of the screen, usually on the right hand side, was where all your stats and your character roster and all that stuff was going on. So by going full screen, we had to have another solution for that, and the solution was, as influenced by modern games, do pop-up windows, and that was one where it was like, well, is there a good reason nobody did this? And I concluded that I don't really think there is. I think it's just a matter that pop-up windows wasn't a thing back then, and it would have come eventually, but it was actually turned out to be one of the more straightforward but yet very visual advancements that we added in Nox Archaist, that being pop-up windows. It was actually pretty straightforward to do, and that's how, getting back to your question about kind of the user interface and whether it's readying spells or other equipment, or just looking at your inventory, buying and selling, it's all driven in a pop-up window style interface where you're using the arrow keys to navigate, in lists, in menus. You can actually use the tab key to switch, between menus for
Nice.
there's a weapons menu, an armor menu, a spells menu for, what spell books you have, a stats menu. And then if you're talking to a merchant, your inventory window pops up on the left, and then a merchant dialog window pops up on the right, and you browse the merchant's inventory with the arrow keys too. Hit enter to buy something, or if you want to then sell, you're hitting like S for sell will get you over to your inventory window. Then use the arrow keys to find your item, hit enter to sell it. Of course, with some scroll text window that's prompting you, like the merchant saying, like, "Well, I don't know about that dagger. I'll give you a 5 gold for it."
Sure.
So that's how I think that'll make the user interface much more approachable.
One of the things while we're talking about the user interface and the conversations, I thought was really cool is, and I don't know if it's on any of the videos anywhere, but I saw it somewhere, where you can change sort of your demeanor. You can whisper, you can talk, you can yell when you're talking to people.
Yes.
I don't think I've seen that anywhere else. Did you was that a you idea, or are you borrowing that from another game that I don't know of?
That was an idea we came up with. We never saw it before in another game. If it does exist, it was independent, and that was just one of the brainstorm ideas from the team, and they come up with so many ideas. And I have the unfortunate role of saying no more than I say yes, and it's actually like when I was interviewing each team member as they were joining, I explained that to them. I said, ideas are welcome. They're great. Some of the best ideas in the game came from, team source solutions, more of them than came out of my head. And I said, but only about 10% of the ideas mentioned make it in, usually because of, memory, constraints or speed constraints or something. But they're really great with understanding that. And they just, fire hose me with ideas.
Right.
And, every once in a while, there's one that comes up where it's like, I can't think of a reason why we can't do it. And it sounds cool, so let's do it. And the voice mode was one of those: whisper, yell, and the normal voice mode. And I just love the potential of that for a puzzle construct within the game. And I spent a lot of time, observing, for example, like Ultima, how the basic puzzle construct was, as it related to NPCs, and a substantial one in the game, was like, okay, so find the NPC that you were told had a certain clue by name. Go find Fred, and he's in Trinsic, so you go find him, you get the next clue. And then there was the construct of, okay, go find Mage Bartholomew, because he knows about something, but you're not told where Bartholomew is.
Right.
So then you got to go find for Bartholomew. And then, was the real kicker of go find the beggar Jude, who knows something about the skull in Ultima 4, and they don't tell you where he is, and he doesn't look like a beggar. He looks like a merchant. It'll really throw you out. So there were these basic constructs, which were cutting edge at the time and made for wonderfully fun gameplay, that I really studied carefully and thought, okay, there's really only, as fun as it was, there's really only a couple of formulas in play there, or puzzle constructs in play there. So I thought, well, this is absolutely a game inspired by Ultima, a homage to Ultima, as well as Bard's Tale and other games. We want to push the frontier, and one of those ways we want to push the frontier is with the puzzles. We don't want it to just be sort of the same old thing of playing that game of go find the NPC whose name you were given, but not the location, or vice versa. We wanted some new constructs. And so here's the voice mode is not the only one, but it's one of my favorites where, you're going to get a different reaction out of the NPC sometimes, not always, based on, well, are you talking to them normally? Are you whispering, or, are you yelling? And somebody that has something top secret to tell you, they aren't maybe going to tell you if you're blurting it, right, or even admit that they know it. Right. And if you're whispering it, maybe they'll tell you. But this actually touches on another mechanic that actually I don't think we've told anybody about. But even if you're whispering it, and they're sitting right next to somebody in the bar, in the tavern, the pub, are they really going to tell you?
No. That's awesome.
You know, probably not. And we built in a feature within the conversation system that allows us to have some restrictions on when NPCs will tell you something. It links to the time of day, and effectively, I may be giving away a little bit too much here, but I'm just going to blab.
Okay.
Because we can link it to the time of day, it effectively means we can link it to the location, because NPCs are on a schedule. They go from their house to wherever they work, to someplace to eat, or wherever. There's
so
a few
you have
other...
taken the time to put a schedule in too.
Oh yeah. NPCs, just like in Ultima 5, that was the only Apple II RPG I ever saw have NPC scheduling on the Apple II. If there was another one, I missed it.
Magic Candle kind of did, but not
which
the
one
same
did?
way. Magic Candle.
Magic Candle did. Okay.
Yeah.
That was actually one I had not played, but in any event, that we our goal was, we want to have NPC scheduling, and we want to try to make it more robust. And we found a few ways to make it more robust, like the NPCs can navigate around dynamic obstacles. Like if the player blocks the NPC's path, the NPC can figure out how to get around the player. Whereas in Ultima 5, the NPC would just stop dead in his tracks forever until the player ran out of food and died, if that's what it took. That was it. They weren't moving. So given that there's those schedules with anchor locations, as we call them, where, it's their house, their shop, the inn for dinner, or some new ones too that we came up with that were not seen before, at least in Ultima. That gives us the ability to say, okay, this particular text question and answer, keyword question and answer, is only going to, the NPC is only going to reveal it if the hour is between 3 p.m. and 3:59 p.m. And at that time, the NPC happens to be in a particular location where nobody else is around. And so then we combine that with the whisper flag, so that, okay, if the NPC is in the spot where we know there's never going to be anybody else around and the player's whispering, then they're going to tell you something.
Wow.
And that's how we kind of, tied all that together. And there's a few other mechanics too, but this is all by way of example of how we did and are continuing to try to make NPC conversation as a puzzle mechanic more dynamic than simply go find, NPC Joe in such and such a town, or maybe we're not going to tell you the time.
Right.
That'll be there too. We'll certainly have some of that, but some other things as well.
I'm really excited about that. That sounds awesome. You mentioned something in there, and I'm almost scared to ask, unless you might think it's a good idea. So I've got up on the screen right now, I've got the outside map, because I want to show people about how far they could see and how many tiles you really can once you strip that out. And it shows the gold, and it shows the time. Are you doing food?
I love that question for a lot of reasons, including, I don't know if you follow the site, the CRPG Addict.
Yeah.
But I love his site, and I occasionally haunt his Ultima 3 review under the handle U3 Guru, because that was my favorite game of all time, and I've played it for probably over 1,000 hours, and can even win copies that are broken, where things crash if you go into the wrong dungeons, because I know that the marks of force and fire are in multiple locations and things. But anyway, I digress. So I love all of his reviews, and he wrote some, as he was going through the Ultimas, he wrote some funny things like, Ultima 3 is looking like it's turning into a really respectable, developed role-playing game, as opposed to Richard Garriott just kind of screwing around, i.e. Ultima 2.
Yeah.
And I thought that was hilarious. And of course, all respects to the king, Richard Garriott, and what he did there. It was cutting edge at the time, and he was all of probably, I think, 18 years old. And as I know, he intentionally just shoved everything into the game, whether it was sci-fi or fantasy, anything he could think of. Just wanted to have fun. So the CRPG Addict is like going through these Ultima reviews. He's popping off these comments like that just had me rolling. And so he said that. What about Ultima 3? And then he gets to like Ultima 4, and he says something like it was one of the opening comments was like, and the Ultima series continues its odd obsession with food and starvation. I just roared because it was like, so, I never really thought about it when I was playing Ultima, because it was like, that's just the way things are done. You have food and you get hungry if you don't have it. And it did have a certain amount of logic to the real world. And, but nonetheless, I definitely found it annoying as a player, have to constantly stock food, especially in some of the earlier ones where the food would go so fast.
Yeah.
And by Ultima 5, he had adjusted the algorithm so that, once in a while you'd buy a ton of food and it's not that big of a deal. But earlier ones, it was just an annoyance, really big annoyance. So as to Nox Archaist, what are we going to do with food? It's not been decided yet. It's not a particularly complicated thing to add in. So I've been kicking the can on it largely because I consider it to be a very touchy area of game design, because there's some strong opinions on there out there on it, including mine. And I can pretty much say for sure we're not going to do the Ultima method of having food that leads to starvation, and it's something that you have to just sort of constantly manage with no real fun that comes out of it. Not going to do that. It's possible we just might not have it at all and skip it. Do we really need it? I don't know. There is one possible sort of in-between approach, which is that there is food you can, maybe buy food from a particular shop or encounter food items, and if you eat the food, like that's an action you'd have to take to eat the food, you get some kind of small health or hit point restoration.
Right.
And I'll admit that was ripped right out of modern games. That is how food has evolved in modern games, as I've seen it. And as a result, it's not really annoying. As a low-level player, an early player, it becomes like, okay, well, that's actually a practical way to buff your hit points.
Right.
You can use some healing spells, but carry some food, and then you get a little bit more ability to survive in battles and things early on. But then quickly it fades out of relevance in the game in terms of restoring health, and that actually feels kind of about right to me.
Okay.
So I think that's the leading candidate right now. If we have food, that would be how we would do it.
Okay.
And I welcome input on any subject, but especially this one. If anybody, if you guys have any input, or anybody watching has any input, write into mark@6502workshop.com with your suggestions, because we really want to get this one right when it comes to the food.
Yeah,
I noticed on your. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say the one food thing the one game that had food that I was thinking of that annoyed me the least was Deathlord. Like, it capped each player at carrying 100, and it went down slowly enough that I could forget about it. That it wasn't a constant on the back of my head. But you did eventually starve. Like, you eventually would start losing hit points from starving.
Okay. Sure. Yeah. I think that model, it's not so bad when, like you said, you don't have to constantly be managing.
But dialing it into the right level is tough. Like, nailing it so that most people are okay with it, because there's still going to be some people who just hate it. Right. So.
And interestingly, I don't think I've ever heard one person say that they want it. Like, that's important that it's there, and I hadn't thought about that word just now, but I really don't think I have. So again, anybody watching, if food is important to you, let me know. So if because like I said, I haven't heard from anybody that it's not, and that makes me tempted just to not have it.
Right.
So,
and I'm torn, because there's part of me that's like, but that's old school games. Like, that. that's part of the formula.
You have to be inconvenienced.
But
you have to be paid a certain amount for it to be an old school game.
Yeah. True. I will offer this, though, as a possible devil's advocate point. I don't remember there being food in the non-tile games like Bard's Tale or Wizardry.
No, there wasn't.
Okay.
There wasn't that.
It seemed to be a tile game thing for some reason.
Might and Magic might have.
Okay.
But that's a rare exception.
I never played that one until the PC.
Wizardry didn't. That didn't. Did Questron, Matt?
Questron did have food.
Questron
yes.
That's right. It did.
Yep.
Did Fantasy? I don't think Fantasy did.
I don't think so.
Now I'm thinking about all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was give and take back then. I
Yeah.
certainly didn't miss it when I played Bard's Tale. I wasn't like, where's my food?
I missed it so little that I forgot its absence.
Yeah, I only remember the games where it annoyed me. So
Yeah, that's right. That's what made it memorable for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
so okay, what were you saying, Matt? I'm sorry, I interrupted
Oh,
you.
I was gonna say I noticed on your page that Richard Garriott has tweeted about your game, so he has witnessed you. I was wondering, will you be in the game as some kind of Lord British-like character?
Yeah. Well. First of all, thanks for mentioning that. That's certainly one of my proudest accomplishments and hopes in doing this project was that it would be something that Richard Garriott would become aware of and be pleased of, as an homage to his work, because he was one of my childhood heroes, and continues essentially to be to this day. And I'm just my life has been so influenced by the work that he did, and to have him be aware of it and appreciate it and be glad that it's being done just means a great deal to me. And as far as any kind of appearance goes, I don't have any plans to do that, and it really, I guess I'm not saying that it couldn't happen. Carrington Vance, when I was on the Open Apple podcast, was threatening to name me something, and and then he's like, and it'll stick, buddy, I'm telling you. Knowing Carrington, it probably would. So maybe it'll evolve, naturally through fans in some way like that. But I just feel a little bit reluctant to do it, because I feel like there's only one Lord British, and it's one thing to do an homage, to his work. And push the frontier and do all those things, but I would just wouldn't quite feel right about like mimicking Lord British himself in that way of appearing in the game, because that was a thing that he did. I don't remember anybody else really doing that. That was like his thing. So yeah. I guess that makes me a little hesitant on that one.
Yeah, I mean, there might have been some people who might have thrown themselves in here and there, but no one actually took their persona out into the real world and then goes by that name as well. Like, he took it to a level
right.
No one's going to follow him at.
An unprecedented level.
Yeah, at an unprecedented level. And total respect for that. I mean, like you were saying, he's a huge influence on you. I give him full credit for why I got into IT. I was interested in computers before, but seeing Ultima 3 and hearing that like some kid at 19 was making six figures off a game, I'm like, go on. I might want to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. He's been such a great influence on so many, and really excited to see his game Shroud of the Avatar when I know there's versions of it out there that are playable.
Yes.
And I'm kind of waiting until it's fully out, partially because I'm focused on Nox Archaist and I'm not going to play something while I'm making it. But
I think that's the best answer. Yeah.
Yeah. They're definitely looking forward to that one.
Right. I will say they're going through a lot of changes and trying to figure out, like, they've shifted focus several times over the last few years. And I think they're trying to find an audience. They're trying to find the people who really are looking for the game they're building. And I know they're having a hard time with it. For the people who like it, they really like it. And the people who don't do not. So
interesting.
It is. It's an interesting thing to follow. But I would say stay focused until it's done. Because whatever you play today isn't going to be what it looks like when it's done.
Well, I will take that advice.
Yeah.
I enjoy seeing a screenshot or two, because I was an early backer of the Shroud of the Avatar Kickstarter, and so I get all the email updates and things, and I do enjoy glancing at those and seeing just obviously how cool the world looks and things like that. So that I don't know if this has survived, but one of the early principles that I remember Lord British was saying was going to be reflected in Shroud of the Avatar is he was going to try to break out of the mold that modern RPGs had fallen into, where they were just so cookie cutter of it's like, okay, so you find you get your quest from the guy with or gal with the question mark, over their head, and then from there, you know, your auto map tells you exactly where to go, you know, to complete the quest, and then there's something floating over the head of the person you need to talk. And it's like you don't need to explore. You don't really even need to pay attention to the storyline. When I first played World of Warcraft back in 2009, I think, and that would have been my first time getting really into RPGs. I was on hiatus since probably like the late 1990s, and so I played World of Warcraft with a friend for the first time in 2009, and I was introduced to the term flavor text.
Yeah.
And you know, and as you know, something would be happening with a quest, and there'd be the stuff, you know, popping up, which was like the story,
right.
You know, and I was like stopping to read it, and he was like, "Oh, that's just the flavor text," and
yeah,
you know,
don't worry about that.
And honestly, at first, you know, I was like, well, but I want to, you know, be into the story. After reading it for a couple of times, I stopped because it really wasn't that good. Probably because most people skipped it, so they didn't invest much with it. And I thought that was so cool about what Lord British was saying about Travis the Avatar in the beginning, is that he was going to bring back the story. He was going to bring back the requirements of thinking and not just, you know, follow the breadcrumbs. And I don't, has that, do you know, has that
yes,
been
he's softened. I will say there aren't above people's heads, but there are like they'll wave if they have a quest. And while there aren't necessarily markers on your map for where everyone is, they're starting to put markers at the side of maps so you know where the exit is. It's little stuff where they're hedging back, and I'm scared they're going to overhedge and go too far back. But maybe they're going to realize, no, let's go back to our core audience, rip those out. Because even though they said they were going to publish a few years ago, they've just announced, I think, over the last week, like, we're not even going to publish in 2017, but by the end of 2017, we'll have a hard deadline of when we're going to. So...
well, I hope they take their time and get it right. You know, it'll be worth them. And
I want them to get it right. I think they fell into too much Kickstarter money, and they expanded and expanded, and it got too big for them.
Okay.
I think that's really what bit them. If they had stayed focused to their original small world concept and getting something out, they could have landed and kept growing. Kind of the way, like, to me, the two examples would have been like Star Citizen and Elite Dangerous are both very similar games. Elite stayed small. Elite is live. Star Citizen is still in development limbo because they grew with the amount of money they got rather than stay true to their core product.
I can see the issue, because if you expand the game to use the capital that you have, that's one thing, but then you need that much larger of an audience to make
it back.
To feed the larger game, and it can be kind of I can see there can be kind of a cycle there that's not maybe a good one, but nonetheless one that's understandable, I guess, to kind of, you know, get caught into, because at the same time the Kickstarter people contributed the money, and you know, there's probably a certain obligation felt to, like, okay, well, we want to use that money to make the game as cool as possible. That's why they pledged it. And so and you know, they're pioneers in really in what they're doing to begin with. So I wish them all the best in feeling their way through that. And I hope that if, in order to find a balance, they need to, like you said, they're starting to bring in some of those little clues, like the waving of the hand. Hey, I've got a quest. I hope. And this is probably like the holy grail, you know, I'm going to say it, you know, just so casually, like it's so easy, but I hope they do it in a way where it's practical for the tells, the waving of the hand, to be turned off, and have the game still be playable.
Yes.
Because then, you know, it's like everybody kind of gets what they want. The problem I've seen with the modern games that have that on-off switch, like Skyrim is a great example, which I fundamentally love the game, and sort of put up with the, you know, follow the breadcrumb trail thing, and I tried turning it off once, and I found that, you know, it really wasn't playable that way.
Nope.
Partially because the world is just so big, you know. I mean, I'm one for exploring worlds, but I don't know that I'd want to spend a week in the real world to find one person to talk to.
Which tree was
Right.
that? Like it said next to the pine tree, and then you look at this pine forest, and you're like, "This is going to be a while."
Yeah, this is going to be a while. Yeah,
Oh.
exactly. So I don't know. I don't know if that balance is possible. It's just an I hope thing.
Right.
I hope if they feel that they need to have the clues to make our audience big enough to make it all work, that they can find a way to make it so that they can the player can turn them off and still enjoy the game.
Right.
And nobody has achieved that. And well, Lord British is great at doing first. So
yeah, let's
go LB.
Always hopeful. So, all right, we're kind of back on the Kickstarter. So then we're a little over an hour here. Oh, we're a little over an hour and a half. So
we've been kicking it.
Yeah, let's plug your Kickstarter one more time and let the poor people get back to their life. It's been great having you, though. I've had a really good time talking to you. I'm
really enjoying it.
Yeah, I'd like to have you back maybe after your Kickstarter, or definitely around launch.
Sure. Yeah, I thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed it too. This has been a lot of fun, and I'd love to come back.
Okay.
After the Kickstarter sounds great. Before launch sounds great. I mean, really, anytime. You know, if there's something you see that we've got going on, where you're like, hey, that sounds interesting.
That, yeah.
People might want to know about that. Hit me up. I'd be happy to come back. This has been a really fun experience.
Great.
And I also think we got deeper into not just the technology, but even the gameplay of Nox Archaist than I think in any other podcast that I've been on. And I think that's really great. And some people, they just want the overview, but I think some people would be really interested in hearing, some of these details. And I think that thank you for the opportunity to do that.
Well, I'd love to. I think people who are interested in these old school games really do want to dig into how does line of sight work? How does the food work? Because we're missing that so badly. We're hungry for it.
Yeah.
So,
all
right. Well, thank you for coming on.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again, and again, everybody out there. I humbly ask for your support on our Kickstarter. Go to kickstarter.noxarchaist.com or just Google 6502 workshop, and there'll be a link right there on the page. And again, we hope that you back us because you want to play Nox Archaist. But even if it's just to help the project for the community. To encourage other software developers to write software for the Apple II or 8-bit in general. Your help is still needed and appreciated. And thank you very much for everybody who's backed us so far.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Thanks.